Good afternoon. Welcome to Integrating Organizational Change Management into Your Project with Lenora Sneva and Anna Moss. I'm Charisse Pidcock with Results Washington. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be your moderator today. Today we have about 1,100 attendees registered for this session. We're so happy that you're here. Thanks also to my team member, Elisa Julius, who is managing technology behind the scenes. A few housekeeping things. We know many of you are familiar with Zoom meetings, but there are some differences in Zoom webinar, which we're using today. The biggest difference is that you won't be able to talk or have your video visible. This enables all participants This allows all participants to focus on today's presentation. We want to draw your attention to a few different features in Zoom webinar and how we'll use them today. So notice the toolbar. If you move your mouse, the toolbar will appear, and you can see the icons for the chat and Q&A. The chat and handout. The chat feature will not be used today, except for some specific parts of the session. There will be handouts that will be posted in the chat as well, so you'll find those there. And then there's the Q&A feature. So feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A. We may not be able to respond to all questions since we have 1,100 people registered, but we'll try our best to answer some of your questions. If you're having technology issues, please use the Q&A feature and we'll do our best to help you. Closed captioning. Next, you'll see the closed captioning icon. If you wish to see the closed captioning, click that icon to either turn it on or off. You can adjust your screen view to make the presentation or speaker larger by sliding your vertical bar on your screen from left to right. Session materials. We are excited to be able to provide you with session materials. Presentations are available and on our website, or will be within a week by Friday. And you'll be able to view those later at your leisure or share them with others. Finally, at the end of the session, a survey will pop up. Please take the time to complete this survey. This will provide the presenter and Results Washington with real-time feedback. If the presenter gets disconnected, we will try to get the webinar back up in 5 minutes. In the event that we cannot do so, we will record the session and put it on our website. So we are fortunate to have Lenora Sneva and Anna Moss with us today. Lenora serves as the Organizational Performance Director for the Office of Financial Management. In this role, she collaborates and advises leaders and staff on how to plan, communicate, and transition to new changes. She also is the One Washington Agency Support Team lead and facilitates the Washington Recovery Workforce Development Group. She has worked for the state of Washington for 10 years and holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of Washington. Her free time is consumed with family, shuffling her teen daughters to competitive volleyball practices and tournaments, and realizing that we can all do hard things. Anna Moss is the Organizational Performance Manager for the Washington State Office of Financial Management, OFM. In this role, she coordinates with and advises leaders and staff on how to plan, communicate, and transition to new changes. She also manages the strategic plan and an internal community of practice for the OCM, Lean, and Project Management, and co-leads a statewide OCM community of practice. Prior to joining OFM in April of 2021, Anna worked for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services for almost 8 years and held various positions focused on organizational development. Anna is a graduate of St. Martin's University, is a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, and is ProSci Management certified. Anna, take it away.
Hi, Sharice. It looks like Anna got kicked off.
Oh no.
Yeah, but we can get started if you want to pull up the slide deck.
Sure. There we go.
Oh, she's back. Anna.
Perfect timing.
Hi, everyone. My apologies, technical difficulties. Thank you, Sharice, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session this afternoon about integrating organizational change management into your projects. My name is Anna Moss, and I'm the Organization Performance Manager with the Washington State Office of Financial Management. And my co-presenter today is Lenora Sneva, who is the Organization Performance Director, also with the Office of Financial Management in Washington State. And we're really excited to present our first presentation at the Washington State Lean Conference today and to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about organizational change management. So before we dive into our topic today, Lenora and I want to complete a quick poll that we're going to ask each of you to participate in. And you'll see the poll pop up on the screen in a moment. And we'd like you to select the best option that really describes where you are with organizational change management. This will help Lenora and I just learn a little bit more about our audience today and also tailor our content today accordingly. How are we doing on poll responses?
We have about 80%.
All right, sounds good. And if you can share those results, that would be great. Awesome. So it looks like we have quite a few OCM practitioners in the audience, some folks who are interested in joining the organizational change management field, leaders, and then other. So thank you for responding to that poll, and we're excited to have you all today in today's session. I also want to share that we're going to offer other engagement opportunities throughout today's presentation, and Lenora and I really want this session to be as interactive as possible. So we encourage you to participate in those opportunities. Also, please feel free to add any questions that you have that come up during today's session to the Q&A feature that Sharice mentioned, and we'll be happy to address those at the end of our presentation today during the question and answer time or during the presentation as needed. Now, our presentation today does focus primarily on organizational change management, but we wanted to make sure and touch upon the relationship between Lean, organizational change management, and project management because they are so interconnected.
All right. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name's Lenora Sneva. Remember back in 2014 when we were doing lots of 5-day value stream mapping activities? Those were all the rage. Those were really long days and really long weeks. And if you didn't do your Gembas thoroughly, you had people in the room who resisted participating. And sometimes you may even had one or two people that said, they're not going to do it the new way. Back then, we didn't talk about organization change management, but an OCM conversation is happening now more and more. Doing work in a new way usually needs a change communication plan with lead people, dates, and goals. The rollout needs to be project managed. At OFM, we've moved from having a lean team to a continuous improvement team made up of staff from each division who meet monthly to discuss and educate on integrating organization change management into what we do every day. So today, what we're going to do is just talk about projects. We're going to talk about OCM and really how to integrate those into your small, large, and medium-sized projects.
All right, and so if everyone can just take a moment and read the quote on the slide by Arnaud Henneville. And you may be wondering why we included this quote as part of our presentation today. And the reason is that as Lenore and I were developing our content for today's presentation, we both came across this quote and we both really gravitated to it. And the reason is that it's so applicable to our world today, and it's really so true. You know, change is constant, and we all regularly deal with change in both our personal and our professional lives. And for that reason, it's really important that we have strategies and tools readily available that we can use to prepare ourselves for change successfully, but that we can also use to support those around us with preparing for change. And as Lenore mentioned, our objective today is to provide you with some best practices on how you can incorporate and apply organizational change management principles into projects. And we're going to focus specifically on the first phase of the change process, which is preparing for change.
All right, so as you prepare to lead change, there are a few steps to take as a practitioner or as a leader to help understand and plan for a successful change. Today, we will discuss the importance of understanding the change, role clarification, and collaborating and planning out communication events. As an OCM practitioner, your focus will always be on helping staff prepare and think about the change and supporting people along the way to this new beginning and future state. Next, Anna will talk about the first step, learning about the change.
Thanks, Lenora. So an integral step in learning about change is building relationships. Relationship building is really an integral part of organizational change management and should be a key focus area when we talk about preparing for change. When we're learning about changes, we're having conversations with several groups and individuals. You know, we're talking to executive leaders and sponsors of the change to better understand why we're implementing the change, why we're implementing the change now, what the risk is to us if we don't move forward with the change, and also better understanding what is the future state vision after the change has been implemented. So we're having kind of that conversation, and then we move over here and we're having a conversation with our project manager and project team to better understand the technical activities that need to take place in order for us to get from where we are today to where we want to be in terms of the change that we're implementing. And then we're also talking with people who are both indirectly and directly impacted by the change, and ultimately will have to do something different as a result. And so as we're having these conversations to learn about the change, one of the focuses we should have is also on building relationships with these individuals, because ultimately that's going to be a success factor going forward. And there are several strategies that we can use to build relationships. You know, I see trust and relationship building as going hand in hand. So one of the strategies that I use to build relationships is to really model following through and ensuring that when I make a commitment, that my actions mirror my words. Other strategies that I use to build relationships are getting to know people, finding common ground, and proactively addressing feedback and concerns. I think the key takeaway here is that when you have relationships that are rooted in trust, it's much more likely that you'll learn all of the ins and outs about a change from executive leaders, from project team members, as well as from impacted stakeholders. We also want to complete an impact analysis to learn about the change, and this is really about defining who all of the impacted stakeholder groups are, and then determining how they're impacted specifically. And when we're doing this work, we want to keep in mind that each individual experiences change differently. And so for that reason, we want to define the impacts of a change at the individual level. And when we talk about workplace changes, we also want to keep in mind that there are several elements of a person's job that can be impacted by a change. So we want to better understand what some of those elements are. So as an example, is someone's reporting structure going to change as a result of this change? Are they going to have to start learning how to use a new system? Are they going to have to do a process differently? So working through those kinds of questions. We also want to conduct stakeholder interviews, so meeting with individuals who will be impacted by the change. I recommend doing this in a one-on-one format and ensuring that all of the feedback I capture during the interviews is anonymous. And there is a link in the chat that was provided to the materials for this session. And one of those materials is a list of general stakeholder interview questions that you can use for future stakeholder interviews that you conduct, and you can tailor them as needed based on the project or the change you're supporting. Generally speaking, though, I try to center the questions I ask around a couple of key topics. One is to gain an understanding of what people know up to this point about a change, and then also knowing how they're receiving the change. A couple of other things I want to know are potential areas of resistance to the change, as well as communication preferences. So how often do people want to receive information? How do they want to receive information? And what type of information do they want to receive? And then just their general feelings about the change. The fourth thing that we want to do to learn about a change is to determine if it is predetermined or not. And what we mean by that is your approach to preparing people for change is going to vary based on whether the change is predetermined, such as a legislative mandate, where we've been given an outcome and we're really going to work to implement that outcome, as opposed to if an opportunity has been identified or an issue has been identified and we're given the opportunity to co-create the solution or the change with impacted stakeholders. So determining whether the change itself is predetermined or not is important. And then the final thing we want to do is visit team meetings to understand work culture. All organizations have their unique culture, as do teams within organizations. And so it's important that we meet with teams to ask them questions so we can develop a tailored approach to supporting them, understanding that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to change. So I talked a few minutes ago about the importance of building relationships, and Lenore and I want to know from all of you in the room some of your go-to strategies for building relationships. So at this time, our Results Washington producers are going to open the chat pane. And once you have access to the chat pane, if you can please answer this question: what are your strategies to build relationships? And we'll take a look at your ideas.
I see listen. Lots of stuff coming through. Finding common ground. Be curious. These are coming through so good. Some really good ideas in here. Icebreakers. Team building activities, mutual respect. And there's trust. That was one of the things that Anna, you talked about. Stay humble, be transparent.
Yeah, I think another one that stands out to me, actually a few, they're all great ideas, but being vulnerable, I think that that's really important. And I also see empathy as well. So Great ideas coming through. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
I think another one that I just would point out real quick would just be, I saw be flexible. I think as OCM practitioners, I think that's one of the key things is you need to be the steady in the room as the change is developing, as you're rolling it out. If you can, you need to be the one who kind of keeps your cool. All right.
So thanks everyone again for participating in that engagement activity. So we are going to close the chat pane at this time, and you won't be able to access it again until the end of our presentation when we'll engage in another exercise as a large group. And we're going to now talk about the Washington Recovery Group. So Lenora and I really wanted to provide a case study and a real world example of a project that we're incorporating organizational change management principles into. And so that project is the Washington Recovery Group. And one of the resources that was provided in the chat is an informational guide about the Washington Recovery Group if you're interested in learning more. And Lenora is going to provide a brief overview of what that group's about now.
Yeah. All right. So the Washington Recovery Group is coordinating statewide COVID-19 pandemic recovery activities and setting priorities that strengthen the resiliency of our state for all Washingtonians. The WRG is made up of agency directors, community partners, and subject matter experts. We meet monthly to break down silos and have real conversations about pandemic lessons learned and how to improve access to services and technology and strengthen our workforce. We are striving for unique collaboration, and it's not often that we intentionally bring internal and external parties together like this. We know that the pandemic largely affected people of color, immigrants, and people in low-paying jobs. As collaboration occurs, we want to center the voice of the people affected and use an equity lens as we make these critical decisions. All right, so the next part in preparing for change is role clarification. And as practitioners, as leaders, we get pulled into a lot of projects. And if we're not careful, we'll be handed the role of change leader and coach and the process improvement specialist and the trainer and the meeting facilitator and the project manager and the implementer. So we say resist. Find some resources and ask for help. As the project manager for the Washington Recovery Group, I was also the OCM manager and the meeting planner. I quickly realized that I needed help, and I found a willing person to help plan and facilitate meetings. For any large projects, you will need to identify a sponsor, an OCM advisor, a project manager, administrative support, and find out who your impacted stakeholders are. Don't plan to do this all by yourself or just with a sponsor. It's really tempting to get things done, but take the time to understand who will be impacted by the change and who can be part of your project team. Do the Gemba, as we say in Lean. Hold meet to learns, as Anna was talking about before, with your stakeholders, and ask for additional people that you can speak with. You will then be able to understand the current state and the challenges that lie ahead. Holding stakeholder meetings and discussing what you've discovered is the next step. Find out, understand what future activities need to happen, what tasks need to happen, and really understand what are the strengths of the people in the room. So you're not having someone who may not like technology as maybe one of the people in charge of technology for your meetings. The third step is to assign the work accordingly. That's really where project management comes into play. And as you know, if you have important work to be done, if no one is assigned to do the work, and if there's no deadline, it probably won't happen. You will need a project manager or a project coordinator to help hold people accountable and help get the work done. All right. All right, so going back to the Washington Recovery Group, our little case study, initially what happened was we received a 30-page report from the Emergency Management Division and the Department of Health. They'd worked together to create this kind of like pandemic report. We began by looking at the report and realizing that we needed to kind of create a group around this. So we identified a sponsor, a chair for the group, a project manager / OCM advisor, that was me, and an administrative support person. This was our project team. Next, we created a draft charter based on the report and the discussions that we had begun holding with agency staff. We collected lessons learned from agency staff and key stakeholders, which led us to develop a work plan. Part of the plan included centering the voice of the people with community partner listening sessions. Those sessions were 60 minutes long, and we invited community partners to be a part of it to really understand what were their lessons learned during the pandemic and what happened to their clients during the pandemic. Collaboration has been a huge part of the success so far, inviting all voices to the table to look at the current state and identify challenges together in work groups. Next, Anna will discuss the important process of planning communication activities.
Thanks, Lenora. So the third element in preparing for change is planning your communication activities, and that really starts with including impacted stakeholders. And there are several strategies that you can use to include your impacted stakeholders in the planning efforts. So typically what I try and do is co-create my communications plan with stakeholders. And one way to do that is including questions about communication preferences as part of initial conversations or stakeholder interviews that you are responsible for. And so I'll ask questions. I think I mentioned this earlier, but asking people, what information do you want to know about the change? How often do you want to receive information? How do you want to receive information? And then taking the feedback received and using that to formulate my draft communications plan. And then sharing that out with all stakeholders to make sure that I've captured everything appropriately and also to provide additional opportunities for feedback. We also want to, as part of our planning efforts for communication activities, plan to conduct pulse checks because we really want to make sure that we're consistently asking for feedback so we can really align ourselves with the lean principle of plan, do, check, act. We develop our communications plan, we implement it, and we want to make sure that we're going back and getting feedback and making adjustments where needed so we can have an effective communications plan and strategy. And there's several tools that we can use to conduct pulse checks. So there's some electronic methods such as Microsoft Forms polling, polling in Microsoft Teams, Zoom polling like we've done today. There's also having one-on-one conversations and participating in virtual team meetings. The key thing here is making sure that we're taking the feedback and we're implementing it. So if that means making some changes, that we do so. We also want to develop key messages and talking points by, again, including our impacted stakeholders. And we also, I recommend using the ProSite AdCur model as a communications framework. And Lenora is going to talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And really tailoring our key messages to each impacted stakeholder group based on kind of where they are with the change, and really striving to provide the right message at the right time. And then finally, we want to identify preferred media. So I think we're fortunate to have several channels that we can use to share information, such as, email, web page postings, video messages, live meetings, and really making sure that we communicate information at least 5 to 7 times and through different mediums so it reaches people in different ways, while also honoring how our stakeholders want to receive the information. And I would also highly recommend making sure that you're using both active and passive communication method. So, if you're providing a pretty static update about a change initiative, an email is probably okay. But anytime you want to have real-time engagement, answer questions, get feedback, making sure that you're using a more active method, such as having a virtual meeting. So it's time for another poll. And so we're interested in knowing which communication mediums all of you use regularly to conduct pulse checks. A tool that Lenore and I regularly use is Microsoft Forms, particularly with our work with the Washington Recovery Group, because Microsoft Forms is a web-based platform. So anyone's able to access it, whether you're on the state network or not. And so we're going to actually use Microsoft Forms for this poll rather than Zoom, so you can get a sense of the look and feel for those of you who haven't used this platform yet. And so I think the link to the poll is being provided in the chat now. So if you open the link, you should be taken to a Microsoft Forms webpage with the poll listed for you to respond to. And then our producers will share the results with us on the screen.
Anna, while we're waiting for those results, we have a question.
Yeah.
Who typically conducts the pulse check? Is it the project team, leadership, or somebody else?
It's a great question. So speaking for the Office of Financial Management and the projects that I'm supporting, I'm typically the one doing the pulse checks as the organizational change management support. And I think that's likely the case with Lenora as well.
Yeah. But I also think I would also add, sometimes we can't come to every meeting. Like Anna said, it's really good to go to the stakeholder meetings and understand the pulse of how people are doing, but we can't make every meeting. So, maybe there's a team meeting where the leader's there and they just ask the question like, how are you all doing about this new thing or this new process? So they can also do it too.
Thank you.
What I like about Microsoft Forms too is it's live. Like when you share the response screen, you can kind of see that people are still taking the poll and it's adjusting. And I love it because it, just like Anna said, it's web-based too. So anyone can access it. You don't need to be in the network.
Thanks, Allie, for sharing your screen. And if you can zoom in a little bit. Thank you. So looking at the responses here, it looks like, and still coming through live, which is great. We have quite a few responses for team meetings, also primarily individual meetings. So it looks like primarily pulse checks are being done using kind of that in-person approach, which is a great strategy. Thank you for participating.
Charisse, this is Elisa. Can you take over the presentation? I will do my stop share.
All right, so I want to just take you back momentarily to the beginning of this presentation where Lenora and I mentioned that our objective for today is to share some best practices around how to apply and incorporate organizational change management principles into projects. And one of the tools that we're going to share with you now will really help you with that effort. And we're going to talk about the Kubler-Ross change curve overlaid with the William Bridges transition model. And the change curve really describes the normal and natural responses that most people go through in response to change. And it's really important to understand the change curve because, as we've said throughout today's presentation, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to change. And in order for you to determine how to help people navigate changes, you first need to know where they are with respect to the change. And so that's why this is really a helpful tool, both from an individual standpoint, because you can use this as a self-reflection exercise, but it's also helpful as a team leader or as a manager or supervisor to understand where your employees are with respect to a change. And then as a change practitioner, it's also helpful for the same reason. So starting with the first phase of the William Bridges transition model, which is ending, losing, and letting go, this is really where we are when change initially happens. And this is the equivalent of the awareness and denial phase of the change curve. And this is when we're first presented with change. The reality of the change has kind of just hit us, and we really need some time to adjust. The second phase of the change curve is anxiety and resistance. So this is where, we've moved past denial and we may start to react and experience some frustration, possibly some anger. We may see some resistance in this phase with respect to the change. And then the third phase of the change curve is analysis and exploration, which is in terms of the William Bridges transition model, this is referred to as the neutral zone. And this is really where we're starting to kind of move from the old to the new, so to speak, and turning the corner. And we see people starting to accept the change and really better understanding what the change means for them and doing some exploration. And then the last phase of the change curve is acceptance and commitment. And this is the final phase in the transition model for William Bridges as well, which is the new beginning. So this is really a time of acceptance. The change is second nature for people. They're celebrating successes. We're seeing the benefits of the change. And people are really in a place where they're saying, how can I help carry this work forward? So I want to talk through just briefly a couple of examples of how you could use this in a day-to-day situation. So let's say that a change is introduced. And when the change is introduced, you kind of look around and you see people maybe expressing some disbelief or kind of showing some avoidance to the topic. This is an indication that they're in that awareness and denial quadrant of the change curve. And really how we can help people as colleagues, as leaders, as change practitioners, when individuals are in that awareness and denial phase, is to give information so they understand what the change is that's taking place. And some best practices that we want to adhere to when we're doing that is to make sure that we're giving information in small pieces. We don't want to, give everything at once and overwhelm people. And we also really want to engage in active listening. So listening to understand. We also want to take this opportunity to clarify what is changing and what's not changing, and accept where people are with the change. As another example, if you're in a meeting and people are talking about an upcoming change and people maybe are responding by showing disengagement, or you hear something like, this doesn't make sense, or I don't agree with this change, that could be an indication that there may be some anxiety and resistance towards the change. So looking at the bottom left quadrant in the table. And in this case, our role is really to help people process emotions. So we're exhibiting and expressing empathy, we're engaging in active listening again, and we're asking the question, are there any barriers that are preventing you from moving forward with this change? And if so, what are they? Because in some cases, we're able to really help remove barriers for people. In other cases, maybe we're not able to remove the barriers, but then it's about seeing what can we do to help people move forward. So again, I would highly encourage you to use this as a reference tool, both as an individual, as a leader, and a change practitioner, to identify where people fall on this curve for a given change, and then using that information to determine strategies to help them move forward.
All right. And I just wanted to put another plug in for what Anna just showed. I just think it's such a really good framework of showing, like, helping leaders understand where their staff are. So sometimes I've brought that same diagram into a meeting. And, you know, when we're in person, I let people put like a sticky dot on where they were at when they thought about the change. In a virtual environment, you could put up a poll and just say, are you ending? Are you in the neutral? Are you letting go? Or are you in the new beginning? There's a couple different ways you can do it, but it's a really good opportunity to also do a pulse check and see how people are doing. So again, using our WRG example, here's a snapshot of a piece of the Washington Recovery Group OCM and communication plan. We began with the OCM principles, which are listed on the left side, and then, you know, moving across to the right to read it. As you can see, again, on the left side, we have included the ADCAR in the first row. And as we thought about involving agency directors and stakeholders, we wrote down some questions to answer to build awareness, desire, and knowledge. These were questions that we were being asked and natural questions that we thought of. We worked on the document as a team. And I think that's really important, again, to not do it all by yourself, to make sure you involve the project team and how you're building out the plan. Leading with empathy is really important when you do OCM work. And I know a lot of people put that in the chat earlier. That's why on the second row, we've also listed some other OCM principles like empathy, involvement, and collaboration. You know, you want to put yourself in the other person's shoes, and what would they be thinking if they learned about this new thing? When you develop your key messages, you also are making your conversations more efficient and lean by addressing possible resistance. So we've got those questions there that we kind of came up with. And then on the far right, under Smarty, there's specific goals. So I know all of you have probably heard of SMART goals, but what we've done is we've added an IE for inclusive and equitable. The Smarty goal speaks to project management, and as these goals can be measured and all need to be tracked. Okay, so starting again, starting a new project needs role clarification, who will do what, understanding who's impacted, meeting with stakeholders, involving stakeholders to develop key messages, and rolling out your communication plan. Best advice we could give to all of you is to be empathetic throughout the change, be flexible, know that change is individual, like Anna said before, and so you kind of have to tailor your message for the people. Respect the person in the process while bringing them along in collaboration. Those are our best advice. And so now Anna's going to lead us through a chatterfall.
Thanks, Lenora. So we really hope that you found today's session helpful. And again, want to thank you for your participation today. And so we want to close by asking everyone to answer these questions in the chat. So the chat should be opened momentarily. And we want to do this using the waterfall method. So once you have access to the chat, if you can just start typing your answers to these questions, but don't hit enter yet. And I'll count to 3, and then we can all hit enter at the same time to see a waterfall of responses. So I'll give people just a second or two to type here. All right, let's hit enter in 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and hit enter.
All right, so people are talking about the change curve, the Smarty goal, empathy is key, the Smarty goal, lots of change curve, Smarties, music, because that was the last thing we talked about, better way to communicate and engage, improve communication, being kind and sensitive to people, stakeholder engagement. You see a couple of Microsoft Forms. I think some of that is new for people. So I think there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that we need to answer about that. Listening to understand. I also like what Gina just wrote, tailoring the message for the people. I think that's really the key. As we said before, change is individual. And so you can talk about a new thing that's going to happen and people will have a different response. You never know. So it's really important, again, to do your pulse checks and then to tailor your communication for those people.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your takeaways from today. And I want to just go to the next slide briefly. So I want to revisit the resources for this presentation. So all of these were provided in the chat. They'll also be available on Results Washington's website. So the first resource here is the Organizational Change Management Best Practices document. So really just some ideas, many of which we covered today, around how you can best incorporate organizational change management into your projects. The second document is that list of stakeholder interview questions that you can use as a starting point for future conversations that you have with employees around changes taking place. And then the third document is the informational guide about the Washington Recovery Group, which was the subject of our case study today. And please feel free to reach out to Lenore or I at any time if you have questions about these materials. And with that, I think we're to question and answer time.
I did see a question, I just answered it regarding Microsoft Forms. There's a couple of comments and questions about that. Someone asked, can you use MS Forms for a complete survey and send it to external stakeholders? Yes, you can. We actually do that with the Washington Recovery Group, and we have, again, community partners and agencies in that group. So it does work. I do see a couple of people that weren't able to access Microsoft Forms because I'm assuming they're not on the tenant. So it sounds like HCA and maybe another agency, they weren't able to access it. Anna, do you have any information on that one? Because I know you're kind of more versed on that one than I am.
Yeah, so we'll certainly need to check into that because there's an option when you're setting up a Microsoft Forms poll or survey to allow anyone to respond. So anyone, regardless of whether you're in what's called the shared government tenant, you should be able to access that. And that's one of the reasons we use it for the Washington Recovery Group is all of our community partner organizations are able to access it. So we'll look into that because it really should be set up so anyone can respond.
Another one from Nancy, I'm not familiar with Microsoft Forms. Is this a tool standard within the state or something that is a special request? This looks like it has a lot more utility than we are typically using.
So I can answer from my understanding. So Microsoft Forms is part of what's called the new Microsoft 365 implementation across state government agencies. And as part of and it's really a revitalization of Office 365 products. And so many state agencies have upgraded to Microsoft 365, and Microsoft Forms is one of the tools that kind of comes in that overall package. So it is relatively new. I think that at OFM, we've been using it, Lenore, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think probably maybe the last year or so, maybe a little less than that.
Yeah, we've been using it, since about a year or so it went live.
Another question that we have, what would you do about those who are resistant to the change, meaning over an extended period of time?
Like they just won't come over, huh? I think, just like people were saying, I think you need to have probably a one-on-one conversation with them. This is probably something that I would start with. Just have a one-on-one conversation to understand, like, why are they resistant? And maybe even sometimes, I don't know, like trying to help them see the benefit. So even like asking them questions about, well, what do you like about it? And trying them to kind of change their negative attitude into positive by kind of making them think about what would be good about it. Another idea would be just finding your change champions too, like find the people that are on the project or that are really excited about the change, and maybe bringing them along to have a conversation with that person is one. Couple ideas. Anna, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the ideas you suggested are great. And I think, I would just add, when you're having the one-on-one conversation, to me, it's, really understanding, that individual's understanding of the change, and really looking to see if maybe there's, as I mentioned, I think earlier in the presentation, but are there any barriers that this individual may have to implementing the change that we're just not aware of? And maybe it's something we can work to address. But I always think it's helpful as well to have people who are on board with the change, and ideally that person's peer in a similar job role, kind of talk to them as well. Because I think sometimes it's one thing if, as a change practitioner, you're working to talk about the benefits of the change, but it's something different if someone else who performs, the same job functions as you is on board with the change and can speak to the benefits.
Thank you. Another question, what's the best way to measure adoption?
Well, I definitely think do a baseline. So make sure you do a survey poll before you start the new thing to understand people's knowledge. And then I think as it's happening, do another one. And then when it's kind of implemented, check in and do another one just to see, okay, did you get it? Are you good? And what else do you need to keep moving to that new beginning?
Thank you. I think this might be our last question. How did Lean, project management, and change teams connect to collaborate with each other? What tools or conversations happen to enable these partnerships, such as like decision, rights, and roles and responsibilities?
Anna, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think what comes to my mind is, Lenora mentioned in our presentation today at the Office of Financial Management, we have a continuous improvement team. And, several years ago, it was primarily focused all around Lean. And then, the group had a conversation and came up with that symbol that was on Lenora's slide that really talked about the relationship between project management, Lean, and organizational change management. And so I think, what we've tried to do is make sure that we have a forum for our project managers, our continuous improvement practitioners, as well as OCM practitioners to come together and really talk about all the projects and change initiatives that we're working on, to really share our knowledge, but also to talk about, the very question that you asked about how can we best integrate our disciplines to get to the desired outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Lenora and Anna, for a great session. I'm certain that the information you provided today will add value to our attendees. Thanks to all of you for being here today. There's more of the conference to come, so please visit our website and maybe revisit sessions that you missed, or something that sparks your interest, download materials, sign up for additional sessions, any of those things. So in a second, we'll end the meeting and a survey will pop up. Please take the time to complete the survey. We want your real-time feedback, and we share that information with the presenters to give them some feedback on how things went for you today. And thank you for attending. Have a great day.